It might not surprise you to know that I was not your average kid. Growing up, my bedroom walls were covered with posters of horror flicks and metal bands. I had stacks of VHS tapes all over the place. Still do, in fact. My clothes were, well, let's just say my mom wasn't comfortable when I went to school rocking graphic tees featuring art from either Giallo movies or Iron Maiden album covers. Ah, that was the life. What completed the look were the piles of Fangoria magazines piled upon my desk and bookshelves. I poured through those things like an anthropologist, studying all of the pictures and quotes from the monster makers. You see, I not only loved horror movies, but I wanted to know how they were made. Some people might think peeking behind the curtain would somehow lessen the impact of those movies, but the effect was quite the opposite for me. Knowing how this stuff was accomplished only made my appreciation for the genre grow. At the time, I could probably name more special effects artists than former US presidents. You know what, that might actually still be the case. And in case you were wondering, yes, I was one of those demented teenagers who made my own home movies that were riddled with cheap gore effects. While there were plenty of artists in the field that I admired, one really stood out. Maybe it was his outgoing personality or the fact that he had no problem showing us how it was done. Most likely, it was those things combined with the idea that he was a kindred spirit, a weird kid who grew up to be one of the best in the business at cutting off heads, chopping off limbs, and making grotesque monsters come to life. You know I'm talking about Tom Savini, one of my favorite figures from the 80s. Grab a machete, or whatever your stabbing implement of choice is, and walk down memory lane as this edition of 80s Horror Memories takes a look at the legacy of Mr. Tom Savini.
Tom Savini really put it the best. Tom would always say he's a magician. And he would say, when I get hired, I go to set with my bag of tricks and I'm doing magic tricks through people. It's all misdirection.
In addition to all of those issues of Fangoria, there was another fine bit of reading that helped contribute to my outrageous love of gore effects. 80s kids will remember Tom Savini's legendary book Bizarro, which, along with a documentary called Scream Greats, Tom Savini, really showed us how the blood sausage got made. Savini would go through the gory bits of just about every one of his movies and tell us how he made it look like someone had just been knocked off in the nastiest way possible. From Dawn of the Dead to Friday the 13th, to lesser-known slashers like The Prowler and Eyes of a Stranger. Savini lets you know where to hide the needle filled with fake blood, how to convincingly chop off a head, or, in some extreme cases, how to blow someone away with a shotgun. Those stunts weren't advised for all of us playing along at home, but the other stuff seemed relatively doable. What Savini was doing, whether he knew it or not, was creating a small army of future gorehounds. And how can you not love him for it? I mean, here's a guy so awesome that he blew his own head off in the trash classic Maniac. Maybe part of the man's charm was just that, his charm. Far from being a bug-eyed cretin who wanted to ruin all sense of decency in the world, Savini always came off as an intelligent and introspective man. He took a clever and thoughtful approach to the cinematic horrors that he was creating. And he was also never shy when it came to speaking about his time in Vietnam, where the atrocities of war would later serve as inspiration for the imaginary wounds that he'd go on to create. I was such a nerd for special effects that I actually saw some of Savini's handiwork in his Scream Greats documentary before I actually saw the movies themselves. Day of the Dead is an example. I still hadn't seen the film, but I already knew about the horrors that it contained, such as Greg Nicotero's severed head, and of course, the brutal demise of Captain Rhodes. Big time spoilers, sure, but I didn't care at the time. I was just so enamored with the art form. But before I even knew who Tom Savini was, I saw George Romero's monumental Dawn of the Dead, a film that was formative for me, an assault on the senses because of the human drama and the sheer excess of violence. It felt like it was created by some kind of mad genius. And of course it was. And it made such an impression on me that I watched it again immediately after the first viewing was over. Now, I could talk all day about the overall impact that movie had on me, but let's focus on the contributions of Savini for a moment. Like a lot of youngins back in those days, I did not know the word squib. Hadn't even really thought about how bullet holes were made and what were clearly actors and stuntmen. I just accepted it as Hollywood magic. But when I saw Dawn of the Dead with its barrage of bullets making mincemeat out of humans and zombies alike, something went off in my brain. It all looked so real, so gross, but in an awesome way. Suddenly something clicked, and I had to know how they did it. Add to that the movie's other magnificent freakout moments, a zombie having his head sawed off by a propeller, guts being ripped out, and flesh constantly being turned into brisket, and I was truly hooked. The reality of the movie and the need to know just how the hell they did all of that was effortlessly linked in my head. I had seen plenty of horror movies before, but none had the sheer impact that Dawn did up till that point. And while of course I was captivated by the characters and the absurd comedy horror drama that they found themselves in, I had to credit all of those disgusting wounds and head explosions for truly capturing my imagination. How did they do that? That's what I asked myself. Lo and behold, I eventually stumbled upon the answer in the forms of that Bizarro book and the Scream Greats doc, which, lucky for me, was rentable at my local video store. My wide open eyes were opened even wider, and an entire world of bloody wonders were splattered upon me. There was this guy, Tom Savini, who did most of the work himself. Not only that, I discovered he was actually in the movie, playing one of the villainous bikers who ruin everything for everybody in the movie's fantastic and tragic third act. This guy did his own stunts when he wasn't obliterating skulls. I mean, how damn cool is that? And here was something even cooler. It turned out that he was responsible for creating some of the bloodshed in a couple other horror flicks that I had already seen. The big one was Friday the 13th, which was always on cable somewhere when I was a kid. While not nearly as epic or influential as Dawn of the Dead, Friday the 13th was a favorite. It's not scary when you watch it now, but when you're a young one, that movie packs quite the punch. And most of that punch comes via the gnarly deaths that we're privy to. I don't know about you, but Kevin Bacon getting that arrow in the throat shocked the fuck out of me, and provided another instance of my young, impressionable self going, how is that even possible? Thanks to Tom Savini's book, I had the answer. As mentioned earlier, Tom wasn't shy about sharing some, if not all, of his secrets. I couldn't get enough of that ghastly catnip. Then there was young Jason. Or the ghost of Jason, was it? Or the deformed boy himself? I didn't know. All I knew was that his appearance scared the crap out of me, and the effect would not have been so troubling had it not been for Savini's excellent design. The fact that we don't see his face for very long made it all the more disturbing. My young mind thought, however briefly, that there must have been a kid out there who looked just like that. But no, that was mere movie magic, or movie madness if you prefer. Speaking of Jason, we have Tom to thank for what is still Jason's greatest quote-unquote death sequence in the final chapter. Seeing Jason unmasked was a pure trip back in the day, and add to that his head sliding down that machete blade while his eyes bulge out, and just, damn man. I mean, who wouldn't want to do stuff like this if you're a movie fanatic at a young age? Watching the Scream Greats documentary was compelling, not only in how it revealed how Savini accomplished all of this gruesomeness, but in how it shined a light on the man himself. Savini was a pretty normal guy, funny and seemingly easy to talk to. If you didn't know any better, he could have been just another Joe on the street. It kind of surprised me that he, not unlike his friend and collaborator George Romero, was anything but a nutcase. Just a regular dude whose job it was to inflict ungodly harm, however fake, on innocent bystanders and creatures alike. The other huge credit in Tom's filmography was Creepshow, still my second favorite Romero movie after Dawn. We knew Savini was more than adept at tearing flesh and sending bullets through bodies, but Creepshow highlighted a different set of skills. This movie had it all: waterlogged ghouls, Stephen King turned into a moss man, skeletons from the grave, and Fluffy. Fluffy, that lovable crate monster from the Arctic who mauls and eats 3 people. Well, 2 people in Wilma.
You're hysterical.
Fluffy was on another level from what I'd seen Savini do, proving that he had a lot more to him than initially assumed. As with the case with Jason in the Lake, you don't see Fluffy all that much in the crate segment, but what you do see makes an immediate and unforgettable impression. And now, of course, Fluffy's a horror legend. And don't get me started on the horrifying finale of Creepshow, when thousands of roaches burst out of curmudgeonly Upson Pratt in They're Creeping Up on You. You might be surprised to know that when I first saw Creepshow on TV, this segment was completely cut from the movie. It was just simply too gross for network television. So my first glimpse of this nightmarish vision was via that Scream Great stock. And as you might be able to imagine, I was floored by A, the revelation that I had not seen all of Creepshow, and B, the absolutely revolting sight of all of these roaches digging their way out of a rather realistic mock-up of actor E.G. Marshall. I'm no fan of roaches. I mean, who is? So this segment still creeps me out to this day, but it's a tremendous piece of work by all involved, and having it end in such hideous fashion is a hoot. Savini built that dummy of E.G. Marshall, and it's a complete success. Never for a second does it look anything but real. Savini and Romero made one believe that many bugs could hide inside of a man before heading for the exits. And I'm still not sure if I should be grateful or spiteful of that. Who am I kidding? I loved it then and I still do now. Only Tom can make being grossed out so much fun.
I have a very interesting history with Creepshow because that was the first job offer I ever got on a movie. You know, I was friends with George and his wife at the time and Tom Savini, and when they got the green light to make Creepshow, I was 17. I was about to go off to college and I went to visit. And George said, "Hey man, we're doing Creepshow. Do you want a job? You want to come work?" And I said, "Oh my God, are you kidding? I would love to, but I can't because, you know, it's the summertime and I'm going to start, I start college in September." That's where I met Tom Savini. It was one of those visits to the set of Creepshow. So George kind of said, "Look, you have an open invite. Come anytime." So I used to go on Saturdays to the Stages, which was a transformed high school gymnasium in Monroeville. And Tom would be there working, and I would go and sit in his lab, hang out with him. So that's how Tom Savini and I developed our friendship. So Creepshow was something that was very near and dear to me. So I was like #1 Creepshow fan club guy. I would have, because I felt like sort of a weird kind of ownership to it because I'd been invited and I was on set. I was like, oh, my Creepshow.
Another one of Tom's beloved creatures is that adorable little girl hiding in the walls in his Tales from the Dark Side episode, Inside the Closet. Holy hell, imagine being an adolescent and feasting your eyes on that gal. This was an episode Savini directed, and he did so quite masterfully, building suspense and a comfortably eerie vibe before paying things off with a shocker of a finale. The initial image of that monstrous Muppet will forever be seared into my mind, and in fact, when we see her interact with her doting father, played by Creepshow's own Fritz Weaver, it's a sequence so creepy that I'm still talking to my shrink about it. Oh yeah, my shrink is named Jack Daniels, by the way. Savini had a promising directing career that never quite took off the way I'm sure he wanted it to. But we're forever grateful for the small sample that he did deliver. His remake of Night of the Living Dead is still an underrated gem, with some of the finest zombie makeup you'll ever see, and a gloomy atmosphere that chills to the bone. It would take a video at least 3 times the length of this one to explain all of the ways in which Tom Savini shaped not only my horror-loving life, but plenty of others. There's no arguing that he's a hugely influential person in the genre, but I'm not sure we appreciate just how much. Let's think of it this way. It's widely acknowledged that we would not have the zombie genre as we know it without George Romero, but you could go one further and say that Tom Savini is just as responsible for how popular it's become these last few decades. After all, his protege, Greg Nicotero, is pretty much the main man presiding over the Walking Dead universe. And who really knows if we'd have this version of Greg Nicotero without Savini? And he's still making monsters today, if not ones that appear on screen, then ones behind the scenes. As a teacher, Savini has taught hundreds of students who've gone on to add to the legacy of cinematic terrors. As long as he's around, he'll help craft haunting memories for all of those who still enjoy seeing a little practical mayhem being flung across the screen. Memories that extend well beyond the 80s, but make no mistake, Mr. Savini is a huge part of our 80s horror memories and our nightmares.
There are 2 episodes left. On the next episode, the Society waits for you. Until next time, Gore Hounds.
Hi friends, your humble narrator Tyler Nichols here, and I hope that you enjoyed that episode of 80s Horror Memories. If you missed our previous episode, click over here. If you want to see more from our series, click up here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right here. And most importantly, stay spooky, folks.